Okay, so I think we should relook at the run and the Miyuchas run and just try and understand what the run is saying in the sugya. So the run only spells this out about halfway through, but it seems that a significant question for the run, and the truth is that I printed here the run as an example, but other Rishonim make a similar point. A significant question for the run is what's this language of Mochek ois gedola v'yesh b'mkoima lichtov shtayim chayev. If you erased a large ois and there is in its place the ability to just mute, and there is in its place the ability to write two smaller oisios, you're chayev. It seems the run is bothered by this language of ois gedola. If you're Mochek ois gedola v'yesh b'mkoima lichtov shtay oisios, you're chayev. Why should it be Mochek? Am I recording here? Let me just check. No, I'm recording. Okay. Why should it be that Mochek ois achas gedola? If you're Mochek a small ois, as long as yesh b'mkoima lichtov even smaller ois, that should be enough. Now it's interesting. I wouldn't have said this was a diuk. This language of the Gemara wouldn't personally have bothered me. I would have said the Gemara just means if you are Mochek a big ois, so that there's room for smaller oisios, because there comes a point where the ois that you're deleting is so small that you can't fit in any two smaller oisios. The Rambam are happy with that. All it needed to say was Mochek ois v'yesh b'mkoima lichtov shtei oisios. If you deleted a letter and there is in its place room to write two other letters, why does it say Mochek ois gedolos? It's interesting the precision that the Rambam expected from the language of the Memra and of the Brisa, and therefore the run that seems to be the diuk that the run's coming from. And basically, if you look in the run, he says three chidushim off the back of this diuk. The chidush number one is that it doesn't mean if you can squeeze in even tiny letters. It means if you can squeeze in beinonis, normal sized letters. But if you can squeeze in small letters, that's insufficient. That's the first diuk of the run. The second diuk of the run is he says that if you wrote in Ashuris, Sefer Torah font, you have to be able to squeeze in letters that are Ashuris, and not letters that are in Ksav Mishk. And just a bit of Jewish history over here. There's a number of fonts of Lashon HaKodesh. What we call Ksav Ashuris is what you see in a Sefer Torah with certain shaped letters and tagim and so on. This is discussed, the different fonts of Lashon HaKodesh are discussed in Hilchos Gittin. When it comes to writing a get, the Pasuk says because of Lo Sefer Krisus, it has to be a Sefer Krisus, a text, a document of Krisus, of division. And one of the very central halachas of Gittin is that the meaning has to be contained in the text. So the poskim there discuss there's quite a lot of discussion around text then. In fact, one of the Gemara comments later on that we'll have a look at is a Gemara in Gittin, because the Gemara in Gittin it discusses a lot of the halachas text. So the Rishonim discuss, does a get have to be written only in Ksav Ashuris? That means Sefer Torah Ksav. We don't write it with all the tagin and everything, but the shape of the letters in the Sefer Torah. Or can it even be written in other fonts? So they mention, for example, Ksav Provençal, the Ksav of the font they used in Provence. As far as I can tell, that's what we call Rashi writing. Rashi writing, as is well known, did not come from Rashi. It was a script that was floating around in Provence and in other areas. In fact, till very recently, even till today, on a small level, but certainly till the Second World War, whilst Ashkenazim used what we call script letters, many Sephardim used what we call Rashi letters as their script. The only reason we call that font Rashi writing is because the printers, when they had to print Rashi on the side of Gemara or underneath Chumash text, they wanted to do it in a different font to make it clear what's Pasuk and what's Rashi. So they just chose a different font, and the font they used was the script font that was floating around, which was what we call Rashi lettering. So hence it became known as Rashi letters. Rashi didn't write in Rashi letters. So Ksav Provençal was the Ksav of Provence, which as far as I can tell is pretty similar to what we call Rashi font. Josh not logged on. No, not logged on. Maybe he logged on to the wrong group. It's not logged on. Yeah. So that's Provençal Ksav. And then the Rishonim there talk about this Ksav Mishk from what I can tell, Ksav Mishka is pretty similar to the font that we use in our printed works. So it's a simplified version of Ksav Ashuris. Besides all the crowns and everything, Ksav Ashuris has certain letter shapes, whereas what we print is like a simplified version. That seems to be Ksav Mishka. Either way, the point in Hilchas Gittin is that there's a discussion as to which fonts of Lashon HaKodesh are called writing in Hebrew, and as far as Shabbos is concerned, the Miyuchas Luran is saying that it has to be, if you wrote in Ashuris, you have to be able to fit letters in an Ashuris, and it sounds like if you wrote in Mishk, then it's enough that you can fit in letters in Mishk. Could be I'm mispronouncing even the word Mishk. I'm not quite sure what it's meant to be pronounced, but that's what the Ran says. And the third chiddush he says is that it has to be that you can fit in a regular sized letter, not a small letter. In other words, an aleph or a base, not a vav or a yud. He doesn't mean dafka aleph and base. He says she'im hu aleph she'imokim nichtav shtei alfin beinonin v'im hu base she'imokim nichtav shtei basin beinonin o acheres dumya dahani, or similar to that. But not that you've written an aleph and you can fit in a vav or a yud. That seems to be the point that the Ran is making. Okay, so just to summarize, the Ran came into the sugya with a diuk, because he carries on and he says, he says, if not, my gedola the katani, what's the gedola that it says? Why does it mean gedola? You can fit in, it could say any letter, as long as you can fit in two other letters, that's enough. Why does the Brisa say, if you wrote an ois gedola such that you can fit in two letters? It must mean that there's a limit to how small these other two letters are. So if you wrote a gedola, you can fit in two other letters that fulfill some sort of criteria. But if you wrote a katana, even though you can always squeeze in a small letter, you can squeeze in tiny letters, two tiny letters. Nonetheless, that's not enough. That's what the Ran says. Now, I don't really understand the word of this. The diuk, I don't exactly understand, but the Ran tells us this is a diuk. I would have thought when it says gedola, it just means that you can fit in small letters. The Ran says no, that you could have written kosav oisachas such that you can fit in shtei oisis. Gedola is a diuk. But why on earth should you have to write average size letters of the same font and the same and big letters, not small letters? Like what would be the svara in that?
That's a principle, what normal people do.
Oh, okay. So the first attempt at an answer would be that it's clear in the Ran. Let's go in the Ran that the melacha is I'm preparing space for writing something else. That's the melacha. It's like a preparation of paper type melacha. I'm preparing a surface for writing, and therefore it has to be prepared for writing. So you can hear the svara of the Ran that papers are made by default for normal writing, not for super small writing. But this doesn't mean average, that you have to work out exactly the average size people write. It means a normal size writing, not a super small writing. So it's true that if you're a mochek something, even a small letter, you could squeeze in another two letters, but it's not by default omed for that. Paper is omed for normal writing, and that's the point of the Ran. That's to be omed for normal writing. That's what you could say. It's interesting. What that means is that I think last year Jeffrey asked, "What's almanas lichtov? Does it mean my intention, or even without my intention?" What happens if I'm mochek a small letter with intention to write tiny letters? I write my notes in tiny writing, and I want to write tiny letters there. That wouldn't be enough, because even though subjectively my intention is to write tiny writing, as Adam called this botkladato, like. Sometimes in halacha, like a crazy type of behavior we don't consider normal behavior. I don't know if it's as far as that. Somebody writes very small. I don't know if that's like botkladato, that's a crazy behavior, but it's not by default omed for that. Paper is omed for normal size writing. That's maybe what it's saying. Some sort of objective criteria that prepared paper for normal size writing, because the melacha has to be a significant outcome. Beforehand, I had a dirty piece of paper that was covered with wrong lettering. Now I've got a nice clean piece of paper that I can write on it. So it has to be omed for normal lettering. Okay, I can hear that svara.
We do have.
Oh, so slowly. So we've explained why it has to be for average size lettering. Now, why would it have to be for ksav ashuris? People write in other sorts of lettering. It's normal to write in other sorts of lettering. Most of us don't write in ksav ashuris. So you might say, okay, he's learning that the melachot of Shabbos has to be choshev only when it's in ksav ashuris. That's not what he says. He says if you wrote in ashuris.
We do have big letters in Ketav Ashuris.
You can have small letters. An expert Sefer can write very small letters.
In the Sefer Torah we have.
It's true, but you can write Sefer Torah with very small letters also.
No, I don't mean that. I mean we have letters which are themselves.
And therefore what?
What?
And therefore what?
No, and therefore, that's why we have the statement of large letters.
No, but the Run doesn't say that. The Run says that, why does it say large letters? To indicate that the two letters you can squeeze in are normal sized letters. That's his diuk. We're asking, why should you need normal sized letters? Why should you need normal sized letters? So the suggestion is because you're clearing the paper for normal activity. Okay, I hear that. But then why does he say if you wrote in Ashuris, there has to be space to write in Ashuris? He's not mashma, so you could say, because there's a chashivas. Ashuris is, say, for Torah writing is chashav writing, and the melachot is preparing paper for chashav writing. But if you look in the Run, he doesn't say that, because he implies if you wrote in Ashuris, you have to leave enough space for Ashuris. Implies if you wrote in Mishk, you have to leave enough space for Mishk. So it's not that there's a rule that it's only clearing paper for Ashuris. Rafi.
It doesn't agree that if you rub out two letters, it doesn't have to then you can have an intention to write any type of letter afterwards in that space. So it's a special discussion. It's only referring to rubbing out one letter.
Yeah. I think that's also true. He only says it's halacha when you're rubbing out one letter. We're not only rubbing out two letters. So we see it's not a special rule that mechik has to only be for ashuris. So the next answer I thought of is maybe his point why he says you have to rub out a letter written in the same font is because the paper is made for continuation of that font. If you have a paper full of mishk writing and you rub out a letter, what are you probably going to write in the place? Mishk writing. If you have a paper of ashuris, what are you going to write in the place? Ashuris writing. So maybe that's what the Run means.
Mishk wasn't bigger than Shiur.
No, that's not the point. No. If anything, it's small. It's a simpler font. But yeah, okay. So, but even that I don't think is true because there's no halacha that you have to have a whole page of writing over here. What happens if you have a blank piece of paper with one letter on ashuris? I rub out my one ashuris letter. Why should I have to write in place two other ashuris letters? It's a blank piece of paper. Maybe I now want to write a mishk letter or a provincial letter. Why should it be an ashuris? So I really don't understand. Again, just to summarize, the Run says it has to be a space for beinonis sized letters. Okay, you can get that. Maybe that's what paper is omid by default for, not for super small letters. Then he says it has to be in the same font as I raised. Not dafka din in ashuris, because if I wrote a mishk, it could be a mishk. Why should it be in the same as I wrote? So we suggested maybe because that's normal. That's like if by default the paper's omid to write the same font, the continuation. But why should it be default? It bishon if I have a whole page of mishk and I delete one letter, so probably I'm going to write in space another two letters, a whole page of ashuris. But who says I've got a whole page? Maybe I've just got a blank piece of paper just with one letter on. And as Rafi says, if I delete two letters, none of these conditions seem to apply. So you see, it's not dafka because it's omid for that. So I don't know what we're meant to make of this Run. Sorry.
I was just thinking that, or we read just too much. I just read it more simply that it was if it was rubbing out that particular font, you should go back in the same font because otherwise you could get a situation where you're not consistent.
And so what? And therefore what?
Because one is bigger than the other. That's how I read it. That's why it has to be the same. Therefore, you could have a situation where one font is bigger than the other font, and therefore you've got to write when you rub one out, it's got to be back in the same consistent.
But my question is why? Why should there have to be? It has to be consistent.
Because there could be different sizes. Those fonts.
And so what? Who cares? So this of cleared paper.
You wouldn't if you could have a situation where you rub out a very big size font, and then you'll be able in that situation to fit in two.
And therefore what? And again, I ask you, and therefore what? So what?
Because that is not. It's got to be almanatic tov in the same.
Why?
The same font.
Who taught the Run that secret? That's my question. Why? By the way, of all Hebrew written, probably most Hebrew written is in scripts, not in ashuris, right? That's a fact nowadays, at least. I don't know about then. And of printed Hebrew, or if people want to write smartly, most of the time we write block letters, but we don't write ashuris. So the paper's only made for mishk more than anything else, probably, at least nowadays. I don't know about in the past. I don't know where
you're mochaking a ketiva. You're mochaking a ketiva in a certain style. So it should be almanach to write the same.
And my very question is where that should be comes from. Who taught the Run this secret? Why? Again, if mochek is preparing paper for writing, then you've prepared the paper for writing. If mochek is deleting information, then anyway, it's a bit strange. Why does it work if you delete one letter that you're chayav? Elamai. But again, we had a suffix. What is mochek? Is mochek deleting information, but it has to be constructive? Or is mochek preparing paper? The Run seems to learn it's preparing paper. I mean, it seems in the Gemara, if it's deleting information, then what is why is it enough to delete one letter? So you're preparing paper. So I can hear that the paper has to be only maybe for a regular sized letter, but why are you in the same font? I don't get it. And why not a Vav and Yud, by the way? Also, I don't really understand. Yeah, sorry, you're waiting patiently. I'll come to in a minute, Rafael, but yeah.
It does not connected that statement to his last statement, says, "לפי שאין לך מוכר, אין לך מוכר אות קטנה שורית שלא יהיה בה כדי לכתוב שתי אותיות."
Yeah, it is.
It's something to do with what Adam potentially suggested, with something to do with the sizing of the font somehow.
It's 100% to do with that. Adam is reading the run 100% correctly. But my question is why? What's the logic behind it? The run says very clearly that if it would be a Vav or a Yud, then you never have a letter that you delete that doesn't have space for a Vav and a Yud. And he's been medayik from the Gedolah that you need a big letter so that there's space for medium-sized letters to fit. I'm puzzling why though. What's the logic behind that? Why should that make a difference? And what model of Mochek leads to that being reasonable? If Mochek is about preparing paper for writing, then what's the logic that if I delete a large aleph in Ashuris, I have to write Ashuris back in that place? I've now got a blank piece of paper. Let me write anything there. What makes it connected to? I've cleansed paper of the mess of a wrong letter in order to put the right letter there.
Could it be that
I'm not asking a rhetorical question, by the way. I'm stuck at the moment here. This is a real question.
Could it be that it's trying to be lenient so we not be liable for transgressing? Is that even?
No. We have to learn honestly the material. Yeah, I'll come to you in a moment, Jeffrey. Rafael was waiting, and then I'll come to you, Jeffrey. Yeah.
Like I was to see if more Gittin understands it even less, because over there it's saying we definitely hide from changing the ink.
Yeah.
So it's not about keeping it consistent with what you're doing.
Okay, so Rafael's mentioning the Gemara in Gittin. That's the reason I printed the Gemara there, but we'll come on to it shortly. For now, I'm just trying to learn the run on his own terms. But you're absolutely right. The Gemara in Gittin is going to get us even more confused. And I'm not going to have any answers yet. I hope by next year I'll have some answers. No, I'm just asking questions. The Gemara in Gittin makes it yet worse, 100%. Yeah, Jeffrey.
Maybe it's similar to Rashi in the same way Rashi said it's about correcting mistakes. So that was the original melacha. So the Ran also holds it's clearing space for something similar to what was there previously. And so it's got to be close.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if everyone heard Jeffrey. Jeffrey was saying that Rashi said on the Mishnah on Ayin Gimel that case of a Mochek perhaps he made a mistake, and this is correcting the mistake. And Rashi there's another Rashi also that's relevant to this language. On where are we? On Ein Hey. She'ei melachot b'chich chashova, and was lichtov. Are yesh makom l'shit? No. Okay. No, just the other Rashi. So Rashi says Mochek is about correcting mistakes. I have an intuition like you that correcting a mistake means I'm putting something similar in its place, but I don't really understand it. If it's a blank, again, the intuition we're picturing is you have a whole page of writing and you made a mistake, so you put in one letter and now you erase it. So there you sort of hear a logic that what you're replacing with it has to be a continuity of the writing. But I'm pushing it into the extreme. What happens if it's a blank piece of paper? It's got one letter on. So why, when I rewrite that letter, should it be something different? And by the way, it may not even be you who wrote this. It may have been written 100 years ago. I've got an old piece of parchment with a letter written on it 100 years ago. I erased that letter to do something else. People, by the way, in the past used to recycle paper the whole time. They were short of paper. They used to recycle paper the whole time. Yeah.
Really, the classic case of Mochek is two letters, because it can't be better than Kota. So when we add on to Mochek, even a Mochek one letter, that has to be a Gedolah letter, because that's considered as if it's equivalent to two letters. Therefore, when we learn out the Gedolah, so we learn out from that, it has to be enough to space to fit in two average letters, and also from the same font, because otherwise it could be much smaller fonts, and so there's no point writing Gedolah. So all these other things come, all these conditions in the run, they come from the word Gedolah. But the starting point is that the classic case of Mochek is only two letters.
So I have the same sort of intuition as you have, but I don't know how to go with it. It doesn't seem to work. So Rafi is saying Gedola means we have a problem over here. How can Mochek be more chomo than Kosev, which is really what Menachem Rabbi Yossi points out. But what's the answer to the problem? That the chashivas of Mochek is because of the space I'm clearing. So what I can write there. So I'm saying there's something intuitive that it has to be Gedola, because otherwise, how can it be better than Kosev? So what am I clearing? It has to be I'm clearing this, but I don't know how to finish off that svara. If I'm clearing a letter that has enough space to write two letters in Mishk, why should that not be enough? The chashivas it's a good question. How can it be more chomo than Kosev? And the answer to that question is because I'm clearing space for two letters. So what's the problem? What's lacking in that? Yeah.
The Ran's we look at the Gemara and think it's trying to be nice and neat and parallel and give opposite scenarios.
Yeah.
But actually the Ran is saying for the Gemara to really make sense and to allow us to pass on the Masorah and the Dinim to future generations, the Gemara has to give the most extreme cases. If the most Ot Gedola is the most extreme case, then that means a normal sized Ot Ashurit isn't a problem to delete. And what the Ran is saying, but we know that if you delete a Benonit Ot Ashurit, then you have room for two letters in another font. So if that really was going to be Asur, the Gemara would have to have told us that.
You're explaining the diuk of the Ran, how the Ran sees that in the reading of the Brisa. Great. But now I'm asking what's the logic behind that, and I don't know the answer. That you're right, that's the diuk of the Ran. But by the way, there is another thing that the first half of the Brisa says Kosof Osachas Gedola. Why does it say Gedola there? Maybe just to parallel the Sefer, symmetry. Why is it Kosof Osachas Gedola?
I think it's to do with the volume of ink that you
use. Something like that. I don't know. But either way, the Ram says a diuk. He says like you say, 100%. But why? Yeah.
Perhaps is that it's nothing to do with this side. Perhaps it's just the Avodat HaMishkan. So in the Karshim, they used to match the board. And it didn't make sense if you write one in that language and one in the other language. So if it needs to be Avulek Karshim, it needs to be like the Mishkan. It needs to be in the same language in order to communicate.
Okay, I was hoping someone would say an answer like this because it gives me a chance to speak about Derech HaLimud. No, because there's an important point over here. So the suggestion is maybe because that's be doing on the Mishkan. We learned in the Mishkan, and therefore just in the Mishkan it was a similar size, similar here has to be a similar size and so on. And this is a really important point. Explaining how something is textually derived from the Gemara, like Martin just did, or how something is textually derived from a pasuk when we have a drasha, or the origins, for example, we learn from this from the Mishkan, never answers the question of how do we understand it. And let me explain why. There are 1,001 differences in what happens in the Mishkan. Maybe like in the Mishkan they were writing in Hebrew, so you only should be chayav in the melachot if you write in Hebrew, not in English. Maybe like in the Mishkan it was craftspeople doing it, so a regular person not. Maybe like in the Mishkan they were writing on wood, the melachot is only when you write on wood. Maybe like in the Mishkan it was in the desert, the melachot is only when you're in the desert, not when you're in a fertile area with grass. Maybe like in the Mishkan it was, I don't know, it was 3,500 years ago, maybe only chayav in the melachot when you do it 3,500 years ago. There's 10,000 scenarios around the melacha. We're trying to understand which ones are pertinent to the description of the melacha. And this is what I tried to explain in last year when I gave a little introduction. And I said that melachas are a meeting between top down, what took place in the Mishkan, but human bottom up, from where we're starting from, what's our lived experience that we see as a chashivas. There may have been thousands of things that took place in the Mishkan. Maybe they were all wearing white robes. But what makes a melacha, any distinction has to be a chiluk that makes sense. That's a pertinent distinction, not just a difference. So at least in our Derech HaLimud, no question ever is successfully answered by saying that's the diuk, that's the thing, and that's what took place in the Mishkan. We still have to ask them, what makes it more of a melacha or less of a melacha? What's the distinction? Why is this a pertinent distinction that the Gemara thought was important, unlike thousands of other chinukim that you could say? So from now at least we're left stuck on the run. Let's all daven well over the next few days, and I don't know if there'll be a Shiur Sunday or Tuesday, but Mitzvah the next Tuesday, next time we'll hopefully have some answers. Yeah.
Two different ideas which may not be I realise when we went through the melachot coating, there were other potential reasons why the melachot coating existed. They wrote Heshbonos, they wrote the letters on the Choshen, they wrote the letters on the Kaddish Hashem on the Sitz. I don't know if this is negative. And the second side, because there was an opinion that only Ashurit and Yevanit were higher.
Yes.
And now the Bahol Ashon and the Mishnah and the Halacha.
Yes.
If it's Ashurit, maybe there's some link to Ashur. I don't know.
The problem is, again, the answer is Mishk. Okay. Again, I'm not. I want to emphasize, I'm not disagreeing with any of these intuitions around here. Your Diak Gedolah is right. Your svara of the svara you said before about the chashivas is correct. Sorry. Yeah, these are all good, but I just don't know how to add them up. Correcting a mistake. These are all floating around in my mind, but I'm not quite sure what to do with all of these. And I don't. As of now, I don't know what to make of the run. Okay, let's move forward because I want to at least see the Rosh today. And the Rosh is doubly relevant. Just to summarize the Rosh outside, really, the Rosh is fascinating, just stunning, seeing Rishon talking us through their thinking process. It happens to be a very interesting Rosh. The Rosh also brings the Tosefta, which the Rambam also paskins like, in which it says that if you are Mochek, a tishtush of the a mess of a blob of ink, you're, as if there's space there to write shtei osios, you're chayev. So there's two things really I just want to draw out from the Rosh outside before we look at it inside. The first is looking backwards. This doesn't seem to align with the run. And the second point I want to draw out from the Rosh is looking forward. Okay, what is the malacha of Mochek? So first looking backwards to the run. If the run says that you're only chayev if you are Mochek a letter, let's say Ashuris letter, where there's enough space to write in it Ashuris. What happens then if you're Mochek a blob? Which font does there have to be enough space to write in it? And if you'll tell me, let's say even Mishk, then why should the Ashuris which I'm being Mochek be worse than a blob? Don't look at the Ashuris that I'm being Mochek as a letter, just look at it as a blob of ink. What would the Rosh or the Tosefta say about the run's point? Surely the Tosefta would have to argue with the run. Because if I'm Mochek a blob of ink, let's say maybe the Tosefta agrees beinonis, maybe that, yes. You have to define somehow what letters we mean. But the Tosefta can't mean in the same font. That not, because there is no font, it's just a blob of ink. And if in a blob of ink I'm chayev, as long as I can write in any font a decent sized letter, then kal v'chomer, not kal v'chomer, but equally, if I'm Mochek an Ashuris letter, why shouldn't it be the same? That there's enough space there to write there in the same font. So that's the first point I want to make. By the way, I didn't get back to this in the run. I'm just reminding myself. We didn't answer in the run why the third rule of the run that he says it has to be the same letter. If I'm Mochek an Aleph, it has to be two Alfin. If I'm Mochek base, it has to be two Basin. Why not? That's really strange. Why shouldn't it be a Gimel or a Dalet or a Hey? I don't really know what to make of it. So all I want to point out in the Rosh is that the Tosefta, l'chura, is not like the Run. The Run is against Tosefta. We see from the Rosh that this Tosefta wasn't a well-known Tosefta in the era of the Rishonim, so maybe the Run wasn't aware of this Tosefta, didn't have access to it. So the Rishonim didn't have access to all the prices that they were, but that's the first point. The second point I want to make in the Rosh is that at least in this Tosefta, it's very clear that Mechika doesn't mean deleting information, because the blob is zero information, it doesn't carry information. Mechika in that side means very clearly creating space for new kasav. It's paper preparation. We started with Hakira in Melachas Mochek. Is it removing information or is it preparing paper? In the Tosefta, it's clear that it's preparing paper because there was no information. All you had was a blob, and you're clearing the blob off the paper to clear it for new writing. That's already enough to be the melacha. Adam, so you want to ask something?
But I didn't read it. I said, or Dumya Dahani.
Yeah. So I don't know what. I don't know what Achirat Dumya Dahani means. I'm also not sure. It could be the same size, or he might mean Aleph base and Dalet Hey. But if I delete a Dalet, I have to have two Dalet in. If I put delete Hey, I'm not sure how to read the run. Yeah, it's a fair point. Okay. Let's just have a quick look at the Russian side. Etc. That's all quotes of Gemara. V'hainu Tama kipa omim kasav mishkan toy sal karish echad u'mochik k'tei lichtov acheres b'm koma min hadin ha'yoroi l'chayv af mochik eis achas k'tei lichtov eis acheres b'm koma el she'enu roi l'chayv al machshavas k'siva yosim al k'siva atzma. It doesn't make sense that you should be chayv for machshavas k'siva more than k'siva atzma. Yer she'en chayv. That's what his point is. So the chiddush of the din is that I'm chayev for ksiva, and I'm chayev for machshavas ksiva, and it makes sense that they have the same share of two oises. Then he says, "V'yireh She'ein chayiv al mechikas tishtush diyai. You're not chayiv from being mochek tishtush diyai. Afilu lichtov kama oisius, even when your intention is to write kama oisius. Keloi b'mishkan ala mechikas oisius kedei lichtov b'mkoma, because the mishkan only mechikas oisius. So here you have your logic of mishkan, but clearly the Rosh is saying there's some logic then to distinguish between the two. In the mishkan you only had mechikas oisius, therefore the melachot should only be mechikas oisius, because mechika oisius is more choshev than mechikas tishtush. Mechikas tishtush is just removing a blob. Mechikas oisius is removing information. Let's park that. Then he says, Achrei kosav zeh mitoch hasvara, v'gam mit knock up the price of mochak oisachas. I have a tiuk. The price is mochak oisachas. It doesn't say mochak tishtush. But you see, b'tesefta kosav ban nofla dior the sefer mochke shav al pinkas mochke. If you remove a blob of ink or a blob of wax, im yefim kumen kedei lichtov shteyus is chayiv. So he says, not like me. But Tama no Boria, I don't understand the reason. The reason is a mistake. It doesn't make sense. I made a diuk that in the Mishkan, the mechika is only where you have an ois, and therefore the melachot is only having an ois, because an ois has a unique chashivas. A tishtush has no chashivas, but an ois has chashivas. That's not true, because an ois written by mistake doesn't have chashivas. The whole point of what is an ois written by mistake? It's a blob. A wrong letter is just a blob. It may be shaped like a letter, but it doesn't carry correct information, so it's as bad as a blob. And therefore the whole malacha isn't deleting information, because this ois was non-information, because it was a mistake. The whole malacha is just preparing paper for writing, was the thought to write. Since I write kosav oisachas gedola, also writes mochak oisachas gedola. But even if mochak tishtush, that's all the same. Okay, so it's a very, very beautiful Rosh, where you see the kind of thinking of the Rosh in progress, and how he originally thought one svara, and then he was choser because of the brisa. He also tells us the lomdus that if deleting a wrong ois is a malacha, then deleting a blob is the same, because a wrong ois is no better than a blob. And for now, all I want to bring out is 2 points. One is, it seems this tosefta is against the run. I don't know a way of answering that, because there's no fonts if you're deleting blobs, number one. And number two, the maskon of the Rosh seems to be on the purest side of melachas mochek is preparing paper, nothing more. It doesn't matter whether you're deleting letters or deleting blobs, it's all the same thing. It's melachas kozo, yeah.
So ask a question on that sort of svara, that deleting something that's wrong is no worse than deleting a blob. If I have on a bit of paper, I've written my directions to get to somewhere, and I've written turn L, and I realize that that's completely wrong, and I really want to be turning right. That's a really important thing to be.
It's even worse than a blob.
It's much worse than a blob. Well, and deleting
the utility in it is different, but the chashivas of the letter is a negative blob. It's even worse than a blob. A blob at least is a blob. Here it's confusing. I want to point out, by the way, in human affairs, mechikas, even when the letter has a chashivas. Maybe, as I said, this was written 100 years ago. It was absolutely correct for 100 years, but now I want to get rid of it because I want to write something else there. Maybe I'm very sad when I'm getting rid of it, but I have no choice. I need a piece of paper, and I have no choice but to delete it. The Rosh thing in the Mishkan, the example I had was deleting a mistake, and mistakes are blobs. Now you may say, how am I being fair? I'm using the Mishkan. No, there's the logic over here that blobs and letters have different chashivas, and therefore it's a distinction that makes sense. If you can substantiate why your chiluk makes sense as a logical distinction, that would be enough. But just to say Mishkan by itself is insufficient. You still need to come up with the svara of a chiluk. Okay, Rabbi, so we'll stop here, and either we'll do an early shiur maybe on Sunday. Maybe I should give an early shiur on Sunday. We'll see. Let's work out whether Sunday again is the Mizrahi day of learning, which is why we're finishing at 9:45, not 10 o'clock. Maybe I'll start shiur at 9:15 then, and still give half an hour shiur at that point. We'll see. Okay, I wish everyone a good evening. Yeah, I'll touch earlier. Yeah. Okay, I'll coordinate in the group. I'll work it out with that group.